Get the live stream started, and this round can go ahead and begin.
Excellent. Thanks, Elliot.
Thank you. We had some conflicts, so we appreciate everyone's patience.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colin Powell. I'll be presiding today. Let me start my video. I'm going to go ahead and call the case of Joy Petria as administrator of the estate of Genesis Petria versus Harper Martini and Peony Estates, calling to order the Circuit Court of Midlands. Let's first have appearances of counsel. Do we have counsel for the Petrios?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, counsel, do we have counsel for the defendants Martini and Peony Estates?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead and make your appearances, plaintiffs.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Yesenia Ireland, and I, along with my co-counsel, Joshua Kennedy.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Afternoon.
And Caleb Holland.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Represent the estate of Genesis Petrillo in today's case. Before we begin, we have a few pre-trial matters we would like to address, or would you like the defense to make appearances first?
Let's have appearances from defense counsel, then we'll go into pretrial.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. All right. Do we have defense counsel for Martini and Peony?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Dima Balut, and I, along with my co-counsel, Tori Ammon.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
And Nicholas Teachner.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Represent the defendant, Harper Martini, in today's case.
Excellent. All right, plaintiff, let's hear your pretrial matters.
First, we would like to make it known that the plaintiff is pursuing battery per pretrial orders dated September 29th by Judge Guglielza.
Very well.
We would also like to draw your attention to stipulation 3 says that exhibits 1 through 10 have already been pre-admitted. Both sides have already agreed on this, and they may be referenced in the opening statement.
Very well. 1 to 10 are admitted.
May we treat you both as judge and jury?
Yes. For what it's worth in the Zoom world, yes.
May we assume that all exhibits have been pre-marked?
Yes, I assume they have been.
May we invoke Rule 603, which calls for the constructive pre-swearing of all witnesses prior to their testimony?
Yes, we'll consider all witnesses to be called to testify today to be sworn as of this moment.
May we also invoke Rule 615, calling for the constructive sequestration of all witnesses bearing party representatives?
Yes. Are there any party representatives that the plaintiff would like to claim an exception for?
No, Your Honor.
Very well. Anything else?
Can we assume all evidentiary arguments are heard outside the earshot of the jury?
Yes.
Do we have the court's permission to display demonstrative aids and exhibits as needed, or do you prefer we ask each time?
You may share your screen when necessary, when you'd like to. No need to ask permission.
Yes, Your Honor. Time allowing, may we have a brief recess at the conclusion of the plaintiff's case in chief?
Yes, we can address that at halftime, but yes.
Your Honor, may we choose whether to stand or sit during opening and closing statements, or do you have a preference?
Whatever is more comfortable to counsel.
And finally, Your Honor, time allowing, may we also have a brief recess at the conclusion of the defense case in chief prior to the start of closing arguments?
Yes, we'll address that at the appropriate time.
With that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Very well. Anything from the defense by way of pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor. We would like to note that Harper Martini will be our party representative.
Very well.
We have no additional pretrial matters to address, Your Honor.
All right. Anything that needs to be brought to the attention of the court before we begin opening statements?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
Very well. Let's have the plaintiffs open.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. A wedding engagement should be the beginning of a new journey for a couple, the beginning of a new-founded love, and the beginning of a partnership to last forever. However, for our couple, Genesis Petria and Casey Soto, it was merely the beginning of the end. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Joshua Kennedy, and today, alongside my co-counsel, Caleb Holland and Yesenia Ireland, we represent the plaintiff, the administrator of the estate of Genesis Petria in today's case. This is Genesis Petria, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. A young woman with a promising life ahead of her had just met the love of her life and soon-to-be fiancé Casey Soto when she met Casey's mother, the defendant in today's case, Harper Martini. Now allow me to take you all back to the night of June 7th, 2019, the night of Genesis's and Casey's rehearsal dinner, and also the night before their wedding day. Everything was going great. Guests were enjoying food and champagne, heartwarming and fun speeches were being made to honor the soon-to-be wed, and everything was going according to plan until Harper, the defendant, made a surprise announcement. The defendant presented everyone at the wedding with a nice bottle of a 2017 Horizon wine. But there was one special bottle of wine that she had set aside just for the victim in today's case, Genesis. A bottle of a 2019 Cara wine that had never been released to the public was given to Genesis. Now, the evidence will show that Genesis began to drink this wine, and as the night continued on, Genesis began to grow more and more ill. Now, today, you will hear from 3 witnesses. The first is Angel Rodriguez, who will guide you through the night of the rehearsal dinner and will tell you that afterwards, once Genesis had gotten to bed, she began to vomit profusely and that Angel called 911 and Genesis was rushed to the emergency room where our second witness, Dr. Kwan, treated her. Now, Dr. Kwan will tell you that Genesis died from respiratory failure that was likely caused by pesticide poisoning. Now, at this point, you all may be asking yourselves, when did Genesis ever ingest pesticides? Well, as it turns out, the bottle of Cara wine that was gifted to Genesis was tested and found to contain a high percentage of pesticides. Not only this, but all other leftover food and beverages were also tested, and other than the Cara wine that Harper gifted to Genesis, nothing tested to contain any pesticides or poisons within them. And other than Genesis Petria, no one present at the rehearsal dinner suffered any symptoms consistent to that of pesticide poisoning. But why, you may ask yourself, would anyone do such a thing? Well, that brings us to our last witness, the victim's almost bride, Casey Soto. Now, Casey will tell you that Genesis and Harper had a rough relationship from the start. Casey will tell you that Harper took things too far sometimes and involved herself too much within the wedding process, and will show you just why Harper committed this heinous act. Now, as the plaintiff in today's case, we carry the burden of proof, which is the preponderance of the evidence, and we gladly accept it. Now, what is the preponderance of the evidence? Think of it as the justice scales. It starts quite like so. We have to start piling on evidence to this scale to start tipping it towards our favor. And once the scale tips ever so slightly in our favor, we have met our burden of proof. The only question that you need to ask yourself in today's case is, was it more likely than not that Harper Martini committed battery? For you to answer yes, we need to prove 3 things. The first, that an act was made by the defendant, Harper Martini. This would be the poisoning of the Cara wine. The second is that they intended to cause harm to the victim in today's case. And lastly, that harm was made. Now, this brings up an important detail to keep in mind. We do not have to prove that Harper caused the death of Genesis. Whether or not Genesis died of pesticide poisoning or some other manner does not matter. We need only prove that the defendant engaged in an act with intent to cause harm or offensive contact to Genesis Petria and that Genesis suffered harm. So remember, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Genesis and Casey were supposed to be beginning a new journey in their lives. But instead, we will prove that Harper, the defendant, made it merely the beginning of the end. And so that we ask that after you hear all the testimony and see all the evidence, you come to the only reasonable conclusion in today's case, which is finding the defendant, Harper Martini, liable for battery. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. You have an opening statement from the defense, or would you prefer to do it later?
We'll present it right now, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may proceed.
May it please the court. We know when, we know where, but we don't know how. Good afternoon, Your Honor, and members of the jury. My name is Tori Amon, and today, alongside my co-counsel, we represent Harper Martini. Now, the plaintiff has just attempted to tell you that they know everything about what happened in today's case. However, as we proceed with the trial today, I urge you to ask yourself, do we really have all the information? We know that a tragedy occurred. We know that Genesis Petria passed away on the morning of June 8th, her wedding day, at a local hospital in Midlands. But what caused this death? Members of the jury, you'll soon see by the end of this case that we just don't know. And today, the plaintiff brings one charge of civil battery. With this, they carry what is called the burden of proof, meaning that they have to prove to you three things. First, that there was an action by the defendant. Second, that through this act, the defendant intended to cause harm or offensive contact. And third, that there was in fact harmful and offensive contact to the plaintiff. They must prove all three of these elements to you by a preponderance of evidence. Think of it as a scale. Now, the plaintiff must prove that all three elements tip the scale in their favor, that it is more likely than not that their theory is true. It's important to remember that the defense does not share this burden. We don't have to prove anything to you today. If at the end of trial you're not quite sure where the scale tips, if you don't really believe the plaintiff has proven each element as more likely than not, if you really just don't know how Petria died, the plaintiff has failed. And the main question you'll be faced with today, members of the jury, is how did Petria die? And contrary to what the plaintiff might tell you, this is essential to their case, as they must prove that harmful contact was made to the plaintiff as a result of the defendant's actions in order to prove their case today. And you'll hear today from Dr. Cannon, who will tell you that pesticide poisoning is not the only way the plaintiff could have died. He will talk to you about the possibility of alcohol poisoning, explaining how the plaintiff's symptoms match with symptoms of lethal alcohol poisoning. Angel Rodriguez and Harper Martini will both support this theory by providing you with specific instances in which they saw the plaintiff drinking heavily and displaying symptoms of alcohol poisoning on the night of her death. Even when the plaintiff arrived at the hospital, the doctor's first instinct was to blame alcohol poisoning. Further, you'll hear from Harper Martini herself. She'll tell you that she had nothing to do with the plaintiff's death. To kill the plaintiff would have only hurt her daughter and her business. Now, did Martini and Petria have a perfect relationship? No. But a few disagreements are not enough to prove battery. You will see that Martini had absolutely no reason or intent to cause the plaintiff harm. The plaintiff will not be able to provide any definitive evidence to prove otherwise. Between Martini's lack of motive and the plaintiff's inability to prove the cause of plaintiff's death, you'll see that the plaintiff has not brought a complete case to you. By the end of trial today, you will realize that we just don't know enough information to truly know what happened to Genesis Petria. You will see that no matter what the plaintiff brings forth to you today, there is no way for them to prove that Harper can be held responsible for Petria's death, because we simply don't know the how. Consider all the possibilities of what could have happened that day. and truly think about what the most likely story is. And I'm confident that you will return with a verdict of not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Is the plaintiff ready to present its case in chief?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Angel Rodriguez to the stand.
All right, Ms. Rodriguez, you may proceed.
Good afternoon. Could you please state your name for the record?
Miss Angel Rodriguez.
And could you tell the court a little bit about yourself, Ms. Rodriguez?
Well, I'm a kindergarten teacher here at Rapid Valley Elementary School here in Midlands. I love teaching my babies, and my two best friends are Genesis and Casey.
I'd actually like to discuss Genesis and Casey with you. Could you describe what your relationship with them was like?
We were like three peas in a pod. It only took us a few drinks to become best friends.
And how did you react when you heard that the two of them were getting engaged?
I couldn't be happier. Like, as soon as they told our friend group, we immediately started planning and everything was falling into place. That's until Casey's mom got involved.
And what do you mean by that?
I mean, Harper changed everything. She made them change their venue from Rosie and Pedro to, of course, Peony Estates, and then forced them to work with the wedding planner,
Objection, Your
Blair
Honor, lack
Osborne.
of foundation.
Sorry, what was your objection?
Lack of foundation, Your Honor.
Foundation for what?
For how she knows this information about the wedding planning and how Harper interacted with her daughter during that process.
Your response, Mr. Kennedy?
Sorry, Your Honor, my witness just testified that she began getting involved on the wedding process in the previous answer, so I believe she would have, I believe I did lay the proper foundation with that.
All right, well, let's, why don't you break up your questioning and make sure that we know exactly how she has personal knowledge of what she's testifying to.
Yes, Your Honor. Angel, how were you involved in the wedding planning process?
Well, I was your maid of honor.
And so did you witness Harper interact with the wedding planning process as well?
Yes, I did.
And can you tell me what that was like?
It was horrible. Like, as I said earlier, me, Casey, and Genesis had everything figured out until Harper got involved. That's when she had to force us to work with Miss Blair Osborne.
Now, from what you could tell, did it seem like Harper and Genesis got along?
Not at all, no.
And why do you say that?
Well, like, the more time I spent with Harper, the more it became clear that she didn't like anybody close to Casey.
Now, I'd like to turn your attention toward the night of the rehearsal dinner, June 7th. How were Genesis and Harper that night?
Before the dinner even started, they could not stop fighting over the lights, the vows, you name it. It was like my little kindergartners. Harper actually said Genesis should just leave the family and save them the headache.
Oh, did Harper do anything out of the ordinary before the dinner started?
Actually, no, yes. I saw Harper carrying a canister with the word pesticide on it. Then whenever I asked her what that was, she goes, "Oh, it's for Genesis because she's such a pest."
Now, when the dinner actually started, what were things like then?
Things were good. Casey gave a speech first, and then Genesis went right after. Both speeches were just all lovey-dovey.
Did Harper give a speech?
Of course she did. But instead of like adding to the happy couple speeches, she used her time to mock Genesis and calling her a problem child. It really wasn't funny, and Genesis didn't appreciate it at all.
And did Harper do anything else out of the ordinary during the dinner?
Yes, surprisingly, later that evening, she toasted Genesis and even gave her an extra fancy bottle of Kara wine as a gift. She gave all of us bottles of wine too, but that one was just extra fancy.
Now, would you recognize the specific bottle that Harper gave Genesis if I showed it to you today?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to display what's been pre-admitted as Exhibits 2A and 2B.
Okay.
Can you see it on your screen, Ms. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Is this the bottle you saw that evening?
Yes, it is.
Did Genesis offer anyone at the table a drink from that?
Yeah, she offered to all of us, but I'm the only one who accepted. But I didn't like it after a small sip, so I spit it out because of the bitter taste. I really just prefer Moscato.
Did you see Genesis drink this wine?
Yes.
Did you see anyone else have a drink from this bottle of wine?
Sad for me, no.
Can you tell the court about the hour following the toast?
I had 1 or 2 more cocktails from the bar while Genesis just kept drinking the wine Harper gave her. I've seen her drink more than that, so it wasn't anything unusual. But around 11, when we all got up to dance, something just seemed really wrong with her.
Why do you say that?
Well, like, I've never seen her completely out of it. She was stumbling and slurring her words. Like, compared to how much she drank, it really didn't add up. I tried to convince her to go to bed, but she wouldn't go.
Did she ever give in and go to bed?
Eventually, yes. Sometimes after midnight. That's because I looked over and saw her asleep and snoring in her seat. And then I offered to take her to her room, but I really couldn't smell any alcohol in her breath.
When you were able to get Genesis back up to her room, was everything okay then?
No, not at all. Like, as soon as we got there, she just started vomiting and sweating profusely. She was getting so sick, and the last thing she said before passing out was 911. So of course I called 911.
Now, when the EMTs arrived, did you go with Genesis to the hospital?
I did. I actually rode with her in the ambulance, but like I said, like, everything was so fast, I don't remember what people were saying.
Now, Angel, I know this may be tough for you, but can you describe what your experience was like while you were at the hospital?
I waited at the hospital at night. I tried to get a hold of Jance's family, but literally nobody would answer. I didn't want to tell Casey because, like, I was still hoping that by the time the morning came, everything would go back to normal. But once like 8 a.m. hit, a doctor informed me that Jancis was in a coma due to some kind of poisoning.
And what did you do after you found out she had slipped into a coma?
That's when I realized that Casey needed to know. So I got a ride back to Peony Estates.
Did you run into anyone on your way to tell Casey?
Yeah, I ran into Harper, and before I can even say anything, she goes, "Oh no, cancel the wedding. Go tell Casey. She needs to know. Jessica got poisoned."
Now, once you finally made it to Casey's room, what did you do then?
Having to tell Casey the second most heartbreaking moment of my life was really, really hard. We rushed to the hospital immediately afterwards.
Now, what reasons do you have to believe that Harper's actually the one who poisoned Genesis?
Well, before the dinner, I saw Harper grab Genesis by her arm and pull her into the hallway. And then whenever I saw Genesis after that, she said, "Keep away from Harper. I'm afraid that Harper is going to kill me if I'm not careful."
Objection, hearsay.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Your Honor, this is an exception to the rule against hearsay, as it falls under Rule 803.3, which goes to show the then existing mental state of the declarant.
Who's the declarant that this made the statement?
Genesis, Your Honor.
Okay, and what was the statement again?
It was, "Keep away from Harper. I am afraid that Harper is going to kill me if I'm not careful."
Okay, and what's your response, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. With regards to the exception that opposing counsel cited, 803.3, this would have to be a statement of the declarant's then existing state of mind, such as motive, intent, or plan, and the statement of "keep Harper away from me" does not go towards any sort of motive, intent, or plan on behalf of the declarant. Therefore, the statement does not fall under that exception to hearsay.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Last word, Mr. Kennedy.
If that doesn't please opposing counsel, then I would also argue that it falls under an exception to Rule 803.4, which is the present sense impression, as Genesis just witnessed the events that happened that would cause her to speak this.
Okay, so are you standing by your 803.3 exception as well?
Yes, I am.
Okay. All right, what do you say to 803.4?
Your Honor, is opposing counsel referring to 803.4, the statement made for medical diagnosis, or is...
Present sense impression, apologies.
Okay, no worries. I just wanted to make sure. So with response to the present sense impression exception, this would be a statement coming directly after an event or condition that describes that event. And here, Genesis Petria is not describing the event of the conversation with Harper Martini specifically. Therefore, it would not apply.
All right, I'll overrule your objection.
Now, I'll re-ask the question. What made you believe that Harper actually poisoned Genesis?
I mean, it would just make sense. Like, first of all, Harper's the one who I saw with the pesticides. Second, Harper is the one who gave the wine to Genesis. Third, Harper is the one who made Genesis fear for her life. Like, literally, one of my
Objection, Your Honor.
partners could tell you that.
Improper opinion.
What opinion are you?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I misspoke. I meant objection to lack of personal knowledge as to Angela Rodriguez stating that Genesis Petria feared for her life specifically because of Harper Martini's actions.
Okay, what's your response, Mr. Kennedy?
Your Honor, she's basing that off of the previous statement that Genesis just made to her.
All right, that's something you can explore on cross. Overruled.
I'll ask the question again, Angel. So what reasons do you have to believe that Harper actually poisoned Genesis?
As I said, first of all, Harper is the one who I saw with pesticides. Second, Harper is the one who gave the wine to Genesis. And third, Harper is the one who made Genesis fear for her life. And literally, one of my kindergarten students can tell you that.
I have no further questions. I pass the witness.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Ms. Rodriguez, you were at the rehearsal dinner on June 7th, right?
Yes.
And while you were there, you witnessed all the toasts that people gave.
Yes, I did.
And that included Harper Martini,
Yes.
a toast that Harper Martini gave to Genesis.
Yes.
During this toast, she gave Genesis a bottle of wine.
Yes.
And you were surprised by how nice Harper was during this toast.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor, this is probative as it goes towards the character of Harper Martini. Plaintiff is attempting to build a case as to Harper Martini not being in the best relationship with Genesis Petria, which would go towards her intent to harm Genesis Petria. Therefore, this question would make the fact more or less likely whether or not Harper Martini did have ill will towards Genesis Petria.
All right, I'll overrule the objection. Did we lose the witness?
I believe so. Give me just one moment. I believe we're having technical issues. I apologize, Your Honor.
That's okay. Let's make sure the timer is stopped, please.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Can you hear us?
Yes. I apologize. Yes.
No worries at all. Thank you. All right, you may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm going to repeat the question for you since you timed out for a bit. So you were surprised by how nice Harper was during her toast, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
And you saw Genesis drinking several glasses of wine at this dinner.
Yes.
After dinner, Casey left to go to bed,
That's right.
but Genesis stayed behind.
Yes.
You noticed that Genesis had slurred speech.
Yes.
She was pretty uncoordinated.
That's correct.
Later that night, you decided to go to the bar with Genesis and one of your other friends.
That's correct.
At which point, Genesis ordered tequila shots.
Yes.
After a while, Genesis slumped over.
Yes.
She fell asleep.
Yes.
So you decided to take her up to her room.
That's correct.
And at this point, she began vomiting.
Yes.
She was sweating profusely,
Yes.
and her skin was flushed.
Yes.
So you decided to call 911.
I did.
And you had Genesis rushed to the hospital.
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Any further questions for Ms. Rodriguez?
Brief, Your Honor. Ms. Rodriguez, at any time in the at any point in the night, did you see Genesis consume any of these tequila shots that she had ordered?
No, I did not.
I have no further questions. I pass the witness.
All right. Ms. Rodriguez, you may step down. Are there any further witnesses from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, plaintiff calls Dr. Kwan to the stand.
All right, doctor. You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan, can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Hello, Petria. My name is Jimin Kwan. I'm currently the Chief Emergency Physician at River Valley Hospital.
And can you tell us a little bit about your educational background?
Yes, I graduated with my Bachelor's in Science and Biology from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Afterwards, I received my medical degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
And what did you do after graduating?
Well, after I graduated, I completed my residency and my fellowship at specifically in medical toxicology. Afterwards, I began working as a doctor until I received my current position at River Valley.
And what do you specifically do as the chief physician at River Valley Hospital?
Well, I do a variety of things. As the chief emergency physician, I overlook the nurses and doctors who work under me. Aside from that, I'm also in charge of ordering tests, making diagnoses, and treating patients.
What sorts of principles and methods did you use in reviewing today's case?
Well, I prepared a report for today's case. In addition to that, I reviewed a variety of documents in order to make the best possible conclusion.
And what did you do to prepare for Genesis Petria's examination?
Well, when I was examining Ms. Petria, I observed the symptoms that she was exhibiting in addition to ordering any necessary tests and things of that nature.
And what sort of things did you do to review for today's case?
I reviewed my report that I had written in addition to just going over those other documents that I had received.
And did you apply these principles and methods reliably?
I did.
Do you believe your testimony will help the jury understand the facts of today's case?
Yes.
And Dr. Kwan, how did you become involved in today's case?
Well, as I said earlier, I was the treating physician for Ms. Petria.
I'm going to go off a little bit, but I have a question. Besides working at River Valley Hospital, is there any other activities or organizations you do outside of that?
Yes, I'm actually a member of the Board of Doctors for Organic Solutions. We are an organization that advocates against the use of chemical pesticides.
Will this at all affect your testimony for here today?
No, of course not.
Now, to move back onto what we're here for today, how do you describe your first encounter with Ms. Petria?
Yes, so when Ms. Petria arrived at the hospital, I initially thought that this was going to be an alcohol poisoning case. I thought this because of the symptoms that she was exhibiting, but there were a few symptoms that were inconsistent with alcohol poisoning, which actually led me to believe that it was something else.
What were those symptoms that were not inconsistent with alcohol poisoning?
Yes, so some of the symptoms that were inconsistent with alcohol poisoning were things like bronchospasms, which caused her to have trouble breathing, and things like the dilation of the pupils.
Since these were abnormal symptoms, did you run any additional tests or labs?
Yes, so we had initially, when she arrived at the hospital, sent her vomit for testing at the lab, but in addition to this, I ordered testing to be done on her blood.
Why did you ask for the test to be done on her blood?
Well, so at this point, I was starting to suspect that this could be an organophosphate poisoning case. Organophosphates are something that are commonly found in pesticides, and a blood test would allow lab analysts to look for indicators of this type of poisoning.
How can you determine if a person has been poisoned by an organophosphate?
Yes, so while a blood test does not necessarily show how much poison has been absorbed by the body, organophosphates actually inhibit the creation of an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase. Now, this is important because low levels of acetylcholinesterase are actually indicative of this type of poisoning.
You mentioned earlier you did a blood test, a lab test, sorry. Do you remember receiving those results?
Yes,
Would you be able to recognize if I showed them to you here today?
I would.
Your Honor, permission to display pre-admitted Exhibit 5 on the screen.
You may.
Dr. Kwan, can you see the exhibit?
Yes, I can see it.
Can you explain, Dr. Kwan, what exactly we are seeing on the screen?
This is the results that I received from the blood test that I had ordered on Ms. Petria.
And can you explain to us what the results and analysis are for just the?
Yes. Yes, of course. So if you'll notice towards the middle of the page, you'll see it says acetylcholinesterase, and then it says low. This indicated that Ms. Petria had low levels of acetylcholinesterase in her body, which, as I said earlier, is indicative of poisoning by an organophosphate.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. Your Honor, permission to display a demonstrative as well?
Yes, you may.
Dr. Kwan, besides ingestion of an organophosphate, is there any other ways a person might be poisoned or be fatal for humans?
Yes, so there are actually 3 ways that someone can get poisoned by an organophosphate. First is inhalation. So if there's some trace of organophosphate in the air, you can inhale it. Next is skin absorption. So if you accidentally touch it or it comes in contact with your skin. And lastly, there is orally. So if you ingest an organophosphate.
You mentioned inhalation and skin absorption. Why did we rule these out?
Yes, so I was able to rule out inhalation and skin absorption because of the way that the symptoms presented themselves. It was inconsistent with both of these types of poisoning. Additionally, there was no evidence of any rash of any kind or anything to indicate there was skin absorption or inhalation.
What did you do after determining this could be an organophosphate poisoning?
Well, after I determined that Ms. Petria had most likely ingested an organophosphate, I did my job as a doctor. I began administering an antidote as soon as I could. Unfortunately, at this point, she was already in the later stages of the poisoning. And by the time that we had administered the antidote, she had already fallen in a coma, and soon after she passed away.
After reviewing, what did you determine the facts of the case that led to the death of Genesis Petrillo?
Yes, after reviewing everything and seeing everything I had through the course of my examination, I was able to rule that Ms. Petria's death was a result of respiratory failure caused by an organophosphate poisoning.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. I pass the witness, Your Honor. As well, at this time, Your Honor, I also ask to preserve the demonstrative.
Well, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan, you currently work as a chief emergency physician.
Yes,
You treated Genesis Petrillo
I did.
on June 8th, 2019.
Yes,
She was admitted to your hospital at around 1 a.m.
yes, around that time.
You noticed Miss Petrillo smelled of wine
I did.
and that she appeared intoxicated.
She did initially, yes.
In addition to these observations, Miss Petrillo was showing many symptoms consistent with alcohol poisoning.
Yes, she was.
Symptoms like nausea,
Mhm.
vomiting,
Yes,
inability to walk,
yes,
and excessive sweating.
yes.
So you ordered a BAC test.
Well, I ordered a blood test that also showed the BAC
So you did order an analysis of the BAC,
of her blood in general.
and this included a BAC test.
Correct.
And Miss Petrillo's BAC came back to 0.16.
It did.
But Miss Petrillo had severe symptoms.
Yes, she did. Symptoms consistent with organophosphate poisoning.
But these symptoms could also coincide with alcohol poisoning.
Yes, so there's something important to note. When there's a case of organophosphate poisoning, many of the symptoms actually present themselves almost as if it were alcohol poisoning at first, but yes.
So it is true that many of these symptoms could coincide with alcohol poisoning as well.
Yes, that's why organophosphate poisoning is often mistaken as alcohol poisoning at first.
And these symptoms included things like involuntary muscle spasms.
Yes,
And Miss Petrillo eventually fell into a coma
she did.
and died because of respiratory paralysis.
Yes, she did.
Typically, a BAC of 0.25 or above is consistent with these more severe symptoms.
I suppose
Is that a yes?
they can be.
But as we talked about earlier, your test result indicated that Miss Petrillo had a BAC of 0.16.
They did.
So because of this number, you ruled out alcohol poisoning.
Yes.
But let's go back to the test you ordered. Your Honor, permission to show Exhibit 5 to the jury?
You may.
One moment. Now, this is the blood test you ordered.
It is.
It indicates that the blood was drawn at around 3 a.m.
Correct.
This was almost 2 hours after Miss Petrillo was admitted to your hospital.
Correct.
And as a medical expert, you know that BAC decreases with time.
Yes, I do.
So because of this issue, we don't know what Miss Petrillo's peak BAC was.
Yes, but it was not something to be necessarily concerned about. It was more than the legal level, sure, but I wasn't concerned that it would fall anywhere too severe.
However, a high peak BAC could lead to death.
If it's high enough, but personally, I have never seen a death due to alcohol poisoning with someone who had a BAC lower than 0.22.
So that's a yes. A high BAC could in fact lead to death.
If it's high enough.
And we don't know what Miss Petrillo's peak BAC was.
I wouldn't be able to tell you for certain.
So is that a yes? We don't know this number?
Like I said, I wouldn't be able to tell you for certain.
Dr. Kwan, we don't know the peak BAC number, correct?
Like I've said, no.
Thank you. So in addition to these issues, the toxic analysis of Miss Petrillo does not indicate specifically how much pesticide was present in her stomach contents.
No, but organophosphate poisoning or poison is deadly even in the smallest of doses.
But this doesn't mean that any amount of pesticide ingestion is deadly.
No, but I would say the majority of it would be.
But we don't know this quantitative measure.
No, I would not be able to tell you an exact amount.
So, Dr. Kwan, because of all of this, you thought that this was a case of pesticide poisoning.
Yes,
And you administered the antidote for pesticide poisoning.
I did.
But Miss Petrillo's symptoms got worse with this treatment.
Not because of the treatment. You see, as I said in my direct examination, Miss Petria was already in the more severe stages of this poisoning. Unfortunately, it was so far along that she passed away, but not because of the treatment.
But she didn't improve with the treatment.
No, because it was already too far along.
So she had a coughing fit,
She did.
a seizure,
She did,
and then she fell into a coma.
unfortunately.
And despite all of these issues, you still ruled this to be a case of pesticide poisoning.
Yes, because of my years of experience of working in toxicology and poisoning, I could say to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that that's what it was.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Anything further from Dr. Kwan?
No, Your Honor. I just may ask the witness to be excused.
You may. Thank you, doctor. Are there any further witnesses from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, plaintiff calls Casey Soto.
All right, Ms. Soto, you may proceed.
Ms. Soto, would you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yeah, I'm Casey Soto.
And why are you in court today?
Because my fiance Genesis passed away.
Now, Casey, I do send my condolences, and I understand that you didn't want to be in court today, but who was Genesis Petria?
She was my everything. She was my best friend. She was my fiance. She was my whole world.
Your Honor, permission to display pre-admitted exhibits 1.
Yes, you may.
I'm just waiting on that to get put up. Ms. Soto, can you see who's on your screen?
Yes, I can.
And when did the two of you meet?
Me and Genesis had met back in like May of 2012 at like this party for my friend Drew. She just caught my eye.
And after meeting at this party, when did the two of you start dating?
We had exchanged numbers immediately and met for lunch, and we made it official about a month later.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about who Genesis was. Are you able to tell us how well she got along with people?
Of course, Genesis got along with everybody I saw her interact with. She was just such a people person, so kind. She got along with everyone except for my mom.
And can you further explain why the two of them didn't get along? Objection, Your Honor. Oh, never mind, Your Honor.
Yes, I can explain why they didn't get along. It started when they first met each other back at a dinner at Harper's house in 2015, and Genesis had made a comment about the wine that was being served, and she didn't know that it was Harper's wine, and Harper held it against her ever since.
Could you further explain what you mean by held it against Genesis?
Of course. I mean, my mom, she could be dramatic. She didn't think that Genesis appreciated my mother, didn't think she appreciated the business, her hard work, any of that.
And did that tension between the two of them impact your relationship with Miss Petria?
Absolutely not. I would not let anything come between me and Genesis, especially my own parent.
Now, I want to move on back to you and Genesis. When did the two of you decide to get married?
It's funny, actually. Genesis is the one who proposed to me. She beat me to it. But we officially were engaged around July 2018.
And what were your plans for the wedding?
Well, we were talking about having it at Rosie and Pedro's winery, but my mom made us change it.
Did the defendant give a reason for wanting it to be changed?
Yeah, something about how my mom always dreamed of having my wedding at Peony Estates and that it would be great for advertising for her.
And did Miss Petria express how she felt about that change?
I mean, yeah, we were both apprehensive at first, but we were already planning to move to Paris. And so we thought that in the end, it would be a great idea because it would save us a lot of money.
So after the venue was changed, are you able to describe the wedding plans? How they were after that venue change?
Yeah, I mean, after we changed venues, my mom just completely took over and began planning the wedding for us, basically.
And did that cause a further divide between the defendant and Genesis?
I mean, it definitely created conflict. My mom wanted this extravagant event, and of course, me and Genesis just wanted something intimate just for us, you know?
And was that conflict in the wedding planning ever discussed between the two of them?
Yeah, I mean, when Genesis and Harper were even planning just for our catering order, they still were arguing about that. They couldn't even get that right without hashing it out. There's so much yelling, I just couldn't handle it.
Now, after the wedding planning had finally concluded, what was the rehearsal like?
The rehearsal was just as bad. I felt nervous throughout the whole time.
Could you explain what made you feel nervous?
Yeah, everything was just so tense. My mom had snapped at Genesis first thing in the morning for being a little bit late, and then they just continued butting the heads the rest of the night.
And how did them butting heads impact you?
I mean,
Objection, Your Honor, as to relevance, may I be heard?
Yes.
I fail to see how the argument between Harper Martini and Genesis Petrillo impacting the current witness has any relevance inside today's case and makes any fact of today's case more or less likely.
Mr. Holland.
Considering that we are here for battery against Ms. Petrillo and the defendant, I feel that them butting heads is extremely relevant to this case.
Response, Your Honor.
Briefly.
Again, Your Honor, the question was, how did that make you feel? We've already elicited the statements about them butting heads, but how the current witness felt about that interaction, again, has no say inside today's case and does not make a fact more or less likely. The feelings of the witness does not add towards the charges inside today's case of battery.
All right. Overrule your objection. Continue.
I'll ask that again. How did them butting heads impact you?
at one point we almost canceled the wedding because it was just too intense. It was supposed to be a perfect day for me and Genesis, but it seemed like it wasn't going to happen anymore.
And was canceling of the wedding discussed with anyone?
Of course, I had even brought it up to my mom too, but Genesis was more sympathetic with me wanting to cancel it than my mom was.
You said that Genesis was more sympathetic than the defendant was. Can you explain what made the defendant not sympathetic?
Yeah, I mean, my mom for some reason was more ecstatic about canceling the wedding than, especially since she wanted to use it for advertising too. So it was just confusing.
Now, as the rehearsal progressed, what happened later that evening around 10 p.m.?
It was so unexpected. My mom had just given Harper this bottle of wine, or had given Genesis this bottle of wine as a gift.
And who all did you see drink from that bottle of wine?
I saw Genesis pour like a couple cups, but I don't know if both of those cups were for her or for someone else. I honestly, I can't remember.
Now, the next morning, how did you find out that Miss Petria died?
I'm sorry, can I have a moment? Our friend Angel actually came running into my room around like
Time, Your Honor. Direct time has elapsed.
Your Honor, I still have 15 seconds left for direct.
Well, that's not what we have. Can we be in the middle for 8?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'll ask that again. How did you find out Miss Petria died?
Angel came running into my room the next morning and told me Genesis was in a coma, and then we rushed off to the hospital, and as soon as we got there, found out Genesis had already passed.
All right.
No questions, Your Honor. Pass the witness.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Soda, before I continue, I would first I'd like to send my regards to your loss, and I hope it's okay if I ask you a few questions.
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you.
Now, Ms. Soto, you just told the jury about how you, your mother, and your soon-to-be your fiance had some conflicts. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's correct.
You talked about how there was conflicts over wedding planning.
A lot of them, every part of the wedding planning process was an issue.
Exactly. Every part of the wedding planning process was an issue between your mother and your fiance. Isn't that right?
Yes.
You also talked about on how the day of the rehearsal, there was even more conflict, that Harper Martini, your mother, was yelling at Genesis. Isn't that right?
Yeah, she was. And just because Genesis was late.
Exactly. But out of all of these things and all of this conflict, you still believe that Harper Martini, your mother, would never do something to hurt Genesis Petria.
I'd like to think that. I just don't know what to think anymore, especially with this whole trial.
I'm sorry, Ms. Soto, I'm going to need a yes or no. Despite all of that conflict, you still believe that Harper Martini would never do anything to harm Genesis Petria.
Yeah, I didn't think she would ever do something to Genesis.
Now, Ms. Soto, Harper Martini, your mother also told you that the winery failed a FDA inspection.
Yes, she did.
And Ms. Martini also told you that she wanted to make
Yes.
sure that this wedding would be the way for y'all to turn around from that.
Objection, Your Honor.
What's your objection, counsel?
Relevant.
Response.
What I don't know what relevance that an inspection holds to this case, Your Honor.
All right, what's the relevance of it, Mr. Teachner?
Yes, Your Honor. A massive issue inside today's case has to do with the intent and mindset of Ms. Martini. The reason why we are eliciting the FDA inspection testimony is because the question that I just asked is when Harper Martini stated that she wanted to make sure that this wedding went off without a hitch, because of it going off without a hitch would mean that they would be able to recover some ways business-wise from the FDA inspection. The reason why this is relevant is because it makes a fact more or less likely that Harper Martini had no intention or had no reason to harm Genesis Petria, because if she did, then it would cause for some sort of ailment against Ms. Martini.
Your response, Mr. Holland?
As I've stated earlier, an inspection doesn't hold much relevance in a case of battery. As we've stated in pretrial matters, anything regarding negligence per se is irrelevant.
Overruled the objection. Continue.
Now, Ms. Soto, your mother told you that she wanted to make sure that this wedding went off without a hitch. Isn't that right?
Yeah, she did at first.
And she also told you that because of this failed FDA inspection, she wanted to make sure that this wedding was something big.
Yeah, she did.
Now, Ms. Soto, I'm going to go to the day in question. I know this might be hard for you, but on the day of, you saw Miss Martini give Genesis that bottle of wine. Isn't that right?
Yeah, she gave her the Carl wine.
And you're a part owner of Peony Estates, isn't that right?
Yes.
You're a part of the operations and creating wine?
I used to play a bigger part, but I've taken kind of like a seat back since then.
But you would say you're moderately familiar with wine and wineries, isn't that right?
Yeah, of course.
Now, you saw that bottle of Cara wine being poured out by Genesis Petria into the glasses.
Yeah, I saw her pour 2 glasses, but I wasn't sure if it was for her or for someone else.
Now, when you saw that wine, you didn't notice any tampering of the cork, did you?
No, not that I remember. I'm sorry.
You didn't notice any pesticide running down the side of the bottle of wine?
No, I did not.
And when your fiance Genesis poured that wine into the glass, you didn't notice any strange discoloration of the wine, did you?
Not that I remember. I didn't see the wine that well.
but you didn't notice anything out of the ordinary with this bottle of wine or even the wine itself. Isn't that right, Miss Soto?
No, I didn't.
Now, Miss Soto, I have one more question for you. Did you ever see Genesis Petria drink that wine that day?
From the most part, I can assume she did, but I can't say I actually saw it.
So that's a yes to my question. You never saw Genesis Petria drink that wine.
Yeah, I didn't.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, I think you're out of time for any redirects, so this witness can step down. I assume there are no further witnesses from the plaintiff?
No further witnesses, Your Honor. Plaintiff rests its case.
All right, is there anything that we need to bring up to the court before the defense begins its case in chief?
Defense would ask for a 5 to 10 minute recess at the discretion of Your Honor and at also plaintiff's whim.
All right.
5 is okay with us too, Your Honor.
Okay, let's take 5 minutes. It's 3:37 Central Time. Let's be back at 3:42. And if I could have the scoring judges pop their screens on when they get back so we know that they're here. Thank you.
Very well, Your Honor.
We're in recess.
Alrighty. I love that little.
Hold on.
Somebody turn off their stuff. Yeah, we
All right, I have 3:42. If the participants could pop back on, we'll get court going.
Plaintiff is ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Very good. Defense, are you also, is everybody here?
Yes, Your Honor, defense is ready to proceed.
All right, Mr. Patterson, Ms. Falone, are y'all present, ready to go?
Yes.
Great. All right. Defense, are you ready to present your case in chief?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to call Blair Osborne to begin their case in chief.
All right. Mr. Osborne, you may proceed.
Please state your name for the jury.
Hi, everyone. My name's Blair Osborne.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Osborne?
Well, I work as a private event planner right here in Rapid River Valley, Midlands. I'm the CEO, the CFO, CMO, CIO, all the executive roles required for my own business, Bliss by Blair Events.
How did you come into this profession?
Well, I'll be honest, I grew up in a bit of a traditional household. My dad, spent a lot of time working out in the fields, and he, found a lot of, worthwhileness in, working with their hands. You judge, man's character by how much sweat he left on the field every day. So, when I wasn't in school, I was out there working on the fields with him, and I hated it. I was kind of miserable all year long. And the only good day of the year was the day of my birthday, when he'd let me go inside, bake a cake, blow up some balloons, and have my friends over to play some games and just have a good time. And that kind of inspired my, future career in professional event planning.
How are you involved in today's case specifically?
Well, unfortunately, I planned the wedding and the matrimonial events of Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo back in 2019, and I was also there, unfortunately, when on June 7th, when Genesis unfortunately passed away.
Was this wedding your first time working with Peony Estates?
No, ma'am. I've been working with Peony Estates for a long time before them. Rapid River Valley isn't exactly the biggest town out there, so in my line of work, I got to know every single hotel owner, every single winery owner. So I've known Harper Martini and everybody at Peony Estates for a long, long time at this point.
How long exactly have you been working with them?
It must have been 4 years at that point. I worked with them a lot, bar mitzvahs, weddings, birthdays, everything like that.
Why did you begin a business relationship with Peony Estates?
Well, it's a bit of an embarrassing story, but back when I started my business, Bliss by Blair Events, I made kind of a boneheaded mistake, and I, overbooked a birthday and a wedding over at the Marriott down the street. And I needed desperately to get, a place to bring the wedding over. So I called every single hotel, every single winery nearby. And finally, Harper Martini called me back, and he was like, come on, bring everybody over. And she, helped me out with that. And ever since then, we've been, great business partners.
How closely do you work with Harper Martini specifically?
Well, I mean, she's the owner of Peony Estates, so I work with her first and foremost every single event. We have a birthday, I got to go over all the decorations, all the food, the menu, all that kind of stuff. I work directly with her, so very closely.
Now, I'd like to direct your attention back to the specific wedding of Casey Soto and Genesis Petria. Can you tell us what your experience was like working on this wedding?
Well, I kind of knew from the beginning it was going to be one of those, drama-filled weddings, The mom and the bride wanted one thing, the couple wanted another. I mean, don't get me wrong, tensions, with weddings are always very high. Mothers always want their own thing, the daughter always wants their own thing. But this was certainly no exception. This was a communication, fiasco right there. And it was really difficult to pull off.
What, if anything, did you notice about Genesis and Harper's relationship?
Well, I mean, it's no secret at the time that Genesis and Harper weren't exactly, like the best of friends. But in my experience working in weddings, I never really met a mother and a future daughter-in-law that really, were the best of friends. It's pretty normal for them to butt heads, and I wasn't exactly surprised to see them, going at each other sometimes.
How did you see Genesis and Harper interacting during the wedding rehearsal?
Well, I mean, June 7th was actually a pretty good day for them, I think. During dessert, Harper presented Genesis with this absolutely beautiful bottle of wine from the Peony Estates wine cellar. And she, brought it over in front of the entire group. And I'll admit, I got a little emotional, brought a little tear in my eye. And at that moment, I saw how much Harper really cared about Casey and, making this relationship work for all of them.
As the wedding planner, were you aware that Harper was going to give Genesis the bottle of wine?
Yeah, I knew, as a wedding planner, I had the entire itinerary. I talked, with Harper about all this kind of stuff. I knew she was going to come out with a bottle of wine for every single person at the wedding. And I just didn't realize how, genuine and lovely it would be for, Genesis and, how emotional I would get and how good it would feel to see.
Objection, Your Honor, narrative.
Break it down, counsel. Continue.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Osborne, had you ever seen the bottle of wine Harper gave to Genesis prior to that night?
No, I was busy preparing for the wedding.
Were you able to see who drank from that specific bottle of wine?
Not exactly. I mean, I saw Genesis open the bottle and drink the wine, but I saw her pour a second glass. I wasn't sure if that was for her or, for someone else at her big old table over there.
After the toasts, how did you observe Genesis acting for the rest of the night?
She seemed fine. I mean, when I left, she was drinking with Angel at the cocktail station, and honestly didn't see how much they were drinking or how they were acting, but they seemed fine to me.
Now, Mr. Osborne, just to be clear for the jury, did you ever see Harper put pesticides into the bottle of wine?
No, ma'am, of course not.
Were you ever told to put pesticides into the bottle of wine yourself?
No, ma'am.
Did you ever see anyone contaminate any wine at Peony Estates?
Absolutely not, ma'am.
Nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Mr. Holland.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Mr. Osborne, you first met to discuss the wedding with the defendant on October 12th of 2018.
That's correct.
And during that meeting with the defendant, you were told that Genesis and Miss Soto were unaware that you were hired.
Yes, sir.
And they were also unaware that the wedding would be held at Peony Estates.
That's correct. I think he was trying to do some sort of surprise for them or something like that.
Now, after finding out that information that they were unaware, you felt very uncomfortable with the situation.
Yeah, usually I like to go through, all the people in the wedding and make sure everything's happy for them, but I was willing to do it. It worked out just fine for me.
Yes, you were willing to do it once you were promised 15% higher if you stayed discreet.
That's correct, sir.
So after that information, you went along with it, and you didn't actually meet with Genesis or Ms. Soto until January 12th of 2019.
That's correct.
And after that meeting, Ms. Petria and the defendant both contacted you about the wedding, right?
Yes, sir.
And their ideas conflicted.
Yeah, I mean, they all had different ideas on, who they wanted to call for, food and what kind of decorations they want. It's pretty typical for, wedding stuff. They always disagree on that kind of stuff.
So that was a yes?
Yes, sir.
And that conflict made the wedding planning chaotic and out of control.
It was incredibly chaotic. Yes, sir.
And it made you feel like the wedding was doomed from the start.
It did feel doomed from the start. That's for sure.
Now, a few days after May 11th of 2019, you met with Ms. Soto and the defendant.
That's correct.
And at that meeting, the defendant played a voicemail from Genesis.
That's correct, if I remember correctly.
After playing that message, the defendant said, one of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it will kill Genesis.
Yeah, I think Harper was complaining about him drinking or, Genesis drinking so much that night. And I think he was, saying like, she's got to be careful with, all the alcohol she's been drinking recently. But I don't know that family stuff. That's not really my job as a wedding planner.
But yes, the defendant said, one of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it will kill Genesis. That's the yes?
Yes, sir.
Now, fast forward to June 7th of 2019. That's the day of the rehearsal.
That's correct.
You would describe the relationship between Ms. Petria and the defendant as heated and reaching a boiling point?
For sure. At first they were arguing, mother and future daughter-in-law, do typically, but throughout the night it got a lot better. And, that gift kind of seemed like a nice little olive branch for them to, kind of come together and, become, family.
Yes, that gift was the wine bottle, right?
That's correct.
And the defendant suggested that Genesis opened the wine bottle when she is alone because it was just for her.
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Petria was the only one you saw drink from this wine bottle?
Yeah, I saw her pour out multiple glasses. I only saw her drink from it, though. I was busy with, all the planning stuff.
And before you left the rehearsal, you saw Ms. Petria and Ms. Rodriguez together.
That's correct.
Did Ms. Petria seem too intoxicated that you'd have to worry about her?
No, sir. She seemed fine, but she was, ordering a bunch of drinks, getting shots and all that kind of stuff. I didn't see her drink any of it, though.
Yes, but she didn't seem too intoxicated.
No, at that point, she seemed fine. She was just enjoying herself.
Yeah, you felt confident about that, and that you felt confident that they might be hungover, but they'd be manageable.
That's correct. At that point, I left pretty early. I didn't see them drink anything.
Now, the next morning, you were aware that Genesis went missing.
That's correct. From my understanding, she died in the hospital.
And when you informed the defendant that Genesis was missing, the defendant said that they would make Genesis's life a living hell.
That's correct. Yes, that is what she said.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Anything further from Mr. Osborne?
No, Your Honor. We just asked that Mr. Osborne be excused.
Yes, he may be. Any other witnesses from the defense?
The defense calls Dr. Cannon to the stand.
All right, Dr. Cannon.
May I proceed?
Yes, let's have opposing counsel pop up and then you can proceed.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead.
Please state your name for the court.
My name is Riley Cannon.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a medical doctor. I specialize in both toxicology and pharmacology, as well as serving as a consultant for Gardner Consulting, Inc.
Where did you go to school?
I went to The Ohio State University. I graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Chemistry, with honors, of course. I then went on to attend Harvard Medical School, where I received my MD with an emphasis in toxicology.
What's your experience in the medical field?
Well, I served as chief toxicologist at Massachusetts General Hospital. I treated patients suffering from poisonings, genetic disorders, and other conditions. Following my time in Boston, I was the faculty member on the Midlands Medical School.
How are you involved in today's case?
I assessed Dr. Kwan's report and related findings.
Did you reach any conclusions based on your analysis?
Yes, I did.
Did you have sufficient facts and data to reach your conclusion?
Of course.
What types of facts and data did you rely on?
I reviewed several exhibits. I reviewed Genesis Petria's toxicology report, her certificate of death, the lab analysis of the empty wine bottle found in the trash, and the alcohol impairment chart provided by the Midland Center for Public Health. I also reviewed Dr. Kwan's report and the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez.
Did you use reliable principles and methods?
Yes, I did.
What were these principles and methods?
I used comparative analysis to audit Dr. Kwan's work and look for any possible inconsistencies. Comparative analysis just means comparing and contrasting documents to get a better sense of what's going on.
And did you reliably apply these principles and methods to the facts of this case?
Of course.
Dr. Cannon, what was your conclusion with respect to Dr. Kwan's findings?
For the most part, I believe Dr. Kwan did a fine job, but prematurely abandoned her initial conclusion that this could have been an alcohol poisoning case.
What do you mean Dr. Kwan abandoned her initial conclusion?
Well, when Ms. Petrillo was first admitted to the hospital, Dr. Kwan initially expected this to be an alcohol poisoning case because Ms. Petrillo showed telltale symptoms of alcohol poisoning. It was only after her examination that she began to suspect it was something other than alcohol causing the symptoms.
Why do you believe that alcohol poisoning is something that should still be considered?
Well, there are really two main reasons I believe that. First, we don't know Ms. Petrillo's peak BAC that evening. And second, while we know that organophosphate was present in Ms. Petrillo's system, we have no way of determining the quantity ingested.
Let's talk about these issues one by one. First, you mentioned issues with the BAC. Before we delve into this, can you explain to the jury what BAC means?
Of course. BAC refers to blood alcohol content of an individual. It is represented by a percent of your blood that is concentrated with alcohol.
What were the issues with the BAC?
Well, the issue with Genesis Petrio's BAC is that we don't have an accurate idea of what that peak number was that night. Now, this is important because a high BAC could lead to death.
Why don't we know Ms. Petrio's peak BAC?
We don't have this information, unfortunately, because Dr. Kwan ordered the blood test far too late. We know that Ms. Petrillo could not have consumed alcohol after 1 a.m. when the ambulance was called, meaning even if Ms. Petrillo took a shot right before going to the hospital, her BAC was almost certainly in a downward trajectory by the time Dr. Kwan ordered the test.
When did Dr. Kwan order the test?
She ordered the test at around 3 a.m., which was 2 hours after Ms. Petrillo's last possible drink. I actually prepared a visual aid to showcase how Ms. Petrillo's BAC might have progressed through the evening.
Your Honor, permission to share this demonstrative? Opposing counsel has already seen it.
Yes, you may.
So, Dr. Cannon, based on this graph, when does BAC begin to peak?
As you can see, it begins to peak roughly 30 minutes to an hour after the last possible drink, with her last possible drink being at around 12:42 a.m., given the time the ambulance was called. We can determine that at the earliest, Genesis's peak BAC was at about 1:12 to 1:42 a.m.
Dr. Cannon, did you review the alcohol impairment chart?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, that was one of the documents I reviewed in this case.
Your Honor, permission to share Exhibit 23?
Yes, you may.
Dr. Cannon, what have I just shown you?
This is the alcohol impairment chart from the Midlands Medical School.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
It is.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No, it has not.
Your Honor, permission to enter Exhibit 23 into evidence?
Any objections to Exhibit 23?
None, Your Honor.
23 is admitted.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, if Ms. Petrio's peak BAC was 0.3 or higher, what are some examples of symptoms she would have shown?
Well, as we can see in the chart, if Ms. Petrio's BAC was between 0.26 and 0.35, she would be much less sensitive to pain and stimulation, would have severe coordination issues, would be unable to stand or walk, would be vomiting, experiencing incontinence, and a blackout would even be likely. If we look at the even more serious symptoms on this chart, which would be consistent with a BAC between 0.35 and 0.5, we see that unconsciousness, depressed or abolished reflexes, abnormal body temperature, coma, and serious danger of death from respiratory paralysis is a possibility.
Which of these symptoms, if any, did Ms. Petrio exhibit?
I actually prepared a demonstrative based on this chart to show which symptoms Ms. Petrio had.
Your Honor, permission to share this demonstrative. Once again, opposing counsel has already been shown it.
Yes.
Based on this demonstrative, Dr. Cannon, which of the symptoms did Ms. Petrio show?
Well, what's interesting about what we're seeing here is that Ms. Petrio showed many of the symptoms consistent with a higher BAC. When she was first admitted to the hospital, she was vomiting, unable to walk, sweating excessively, and exhibited incontinence, which, oddly enough, Dr. Kwan says is not a symptom of alcohol poisoning, but it indeed is. Sadly, Ms. Petria eventually fell into a coma and died at around 9:30 a.m. from respiratory paralysis.
Is it necessary that a patient show all of these symptoms to be diagnosed with a condition?
Of course not. This is not a strict checklist that a patient must follow. Lists like this just give a general sense of what a patient would be experiencing if they had a specific condition.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. Now let's move on to the second part of your analysis. You mentioned some issues with the blood test. What specifically were there?
The issue with the blood test is that it does not tell us how much organophosphate a patient has ingested. In fact, because this poison goes through rapid hydrolysis, meaning it's quickly broken down by water in the liver, it's not detectable in the bloodstream. There is no simple blood test to determine the quantitative levels.
Why would it be important to know these quantitative levels?
Although organophosphate ingestion is serious, even in small amounts, that doesn't mean that any amount of organophosphate ingestion is deadly. So while it's true that pesticides were present in the stomach contents of Genesis Petria, we don't know definitively that these levels would be fatal.
Is there anything else that makes you believe that Ms. Petria's death was not a result of pesticide poisoning?
Actually, yes. Even after Ms. Petria was administered the antidote for pesticide poisoning, her situation continued to grow worse. This is when she had a coughing fit and a seizure, and then eventually fell into the coma.
So, taking all of what we discussed together, how would you evaluate Dr. Kwan's report for this case?
As I mentioned earlier, I think Dr. Kwan did a good job, but should have administered the blood test much earlier so we could have a better picture of what happened that night. Because of this, I still think alcohol poisoning is a real possibility in this case.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Ms. Ireland.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Cannon, you mentioned that you worked at Gardner Consulting.
Yes.
And one of your biggest clients at Gardner Consulting is Desky Roach and Rodent Killer.
I believe that's true.
And you mentioned that Desky Roach and Rodent Killer, their CEO, mentioned that they would find it extremely important.
Objection, hearsay.
Response.
Sorry, Your Honor, can I respond?
Yes, please.
Your Honor, my client, Dr. Cannon is just mentioning what the relevance, the bias towards, the bias that she has since she's working at Gardner Consulting. This is one of the biggest clients that she has, so she's just mentioning what they told her regarding to this case.
Okay.
Response, Your Honor?
I'm curious. It seems like you were about to ask a question that involved something somebody else said. So how is that not hearsay?
Well, they work with each other, and this has to do with the case. Mentioning, their relationship since he is the pesticide company.
A response from the defense.
Your Honor, these statements are still out-of-court statements that are made by someone who is not present in today's case. Specifically, these statements are made by the CEO, and because they are out-of-court statements, they are inadmissible and would be considered hearsay.
All right, I'll sustain the objection. There will be no statements from the CEO unless you can lay the proper predicate for an exception or an exclusion to hearsay.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Cannon, you also mentioned that you had limited documents that you reviewed.
I did review several documents in this case.
The ones that you reviewed were Dr. Kwan's report and as well as Angel Rodriguez affidavit with just a few exhibits, right?
Among a few others, I did review those, yes.
You had no contact with the deceased body and you could have not done any examination?
Unfortunately, there was no body to perform any examinations on.
And you also did not have contact with anybody who was there that evening?
No, I did review Angel Rodriguez's affidavit, but aside from that, I had no direct contact with anyone present.
And as for your most likely assumption that it was alcohol poisoning, you are aware that Genesis Petria's BAC was 0.16 when she arrived at the hospital?
Well, due to how late the blood test was administered, it's almost certain that the blood or that Genesis's peak BAC was considerably higher than 0.16. And given that, alcohol poisoning is very much a possibility.
But it is true that it was 0.16 at the hospital.
When it was measured 2 hours after her last possible drink, it did register as 0.16.
And you personally have never seen any fatalities with a BAC lower than a 0.30?
Personally, not during my practice, no.
And you also agree with Dr. Kwan that the ultimate death of Genesis Petria was the respiratory failure?
No. No, I would say that given the facts of the case and what we have, respiratory failure would be the most likely cause of death, but we can't attribute that directly and definitively to pesticide usage.
But Genesis Petria did die from a respiratory failure. You agree with that, Dr. Cannon?
Respiratory failure was the cause of death, yes.
Yes, that's what I meant, Dr. Cannon. As well as you do agree that there was an organophosphate containing in the blood work that Dr. Kwan did.
There was some amount found in her blood, yes.
And that the wine tested positive that night for organophosphate as well.
Yes.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Any further questions for Dr. Cannon?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Any further witnesses from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to call Harper Martini to the stand.
You may call Ms. Martini.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hello, love. My name is Harper Martini.
And what do you do for a living, Miss Martini?
I own a winery called Peony Estates Winery and Bed and Breakfast.
And how exactly did you get into the wine industry?
Well, I grew up in Napa Valley, where my family owned a winery called Castello di Martini, and I guess you could say I have wine running through my veins.
Outside of wine, what else do you do at Peony Estates?
Well, we also have a bed and breakfast, tastings, and host events such as weddings. Honestly, all of that is thanks to Casey.
Who's Casey?
Casey is the apple of my eye, the sun to my planet. Casey Soto is my daughter, and the only thing in my life that I care more about than the winery. Those are the two most important things in my life, and everything I do is to keep Casey happy and this winery successful.
And how is your relationship with your daughter, Casey?
Oh, just wonderful. She is the most amazing woman I know. Casey and I have always been very close, especially since my husband passed away. May he rest in peace. Casey is thoughtful and caring, but also creative and headstrong, which makes her a vital part of the business.
And how exactly is Casey involved in the business?
Oh, well, it was all Casey's idea to open the B&B and host events like weddings at the winery. She designed everything from bedding arrangements to the menu. Without her incredible business instincts, I don't think the winery would have ever taken off like it did.
So why are you here today, Miss Martini?
Well, seeing that the wedding business's success was all thanks to Casey, it only made sense for her to get married in her creation. Having her married at our winery made me feel so much closer to her. Unfortunately, during the wedding, her fiancé, Genesis Petrillo, tragically passed away.
Now, you mentioned Miss Petrillo. Could you describe the nature of your relationship?
Yes, honestly, we didn't always get along that well because I felt like Genesis was a really bad influence on Casey, and she didn't respect Casey's work at the winery at all.
Could you tell the jury why you felt that way?
Well, one time, Genesis convinced Casey to drink so much that she ended up in the hospital for alcohol poisoning. And
proper character evidence.
All right, explain your objection. What's the character evidence being elicited?
Your Honor, I'm sorry, Your Honor, opposing counsel or the witness's answer is going to show what kind of a person Genesis is based on a prior act, which is not permissible under the rules of evidence.
What's your response, Mr. Keisher?
Yes, Your Honor, we are not using this piece of evidence to show conformity therewith, having to do with Genesis Petria. Rather, we are using these statements by the witness to talk about the nature of her relationship with Genesis Petria, which is a massive issue inside today's court. If you would like, Your Honor, I would be fine with having a limiting instruction to the jury to take these statements being stated by Harper Martini, not as character evidence or not to show any sort of conformity, but rather to only look at it in the guise of how the relationship is between Harper and Genesis.
What's the specific testimony that you're having her testify?
Your Honor, what she's about to say is she's about to talk about some instances in why she originally did not trust or like Genesis Petria originally inside the relationship. Opposing counsel thinks that we're using this to show conformity therewith. We are not, Your Honor. If you would like, the opposing counsel could say what specifically they have a problem with, but also we would be fine with that limiting instruction.
All right, what's your last word, Mr. Kennedy?
Your Honor, we just believe that through the words of the witness talking about an incident where hospitalization occurred due to alcohol, that this goes to show Genesis was an alcoholic and therefore showing conformity therewith.
Your objection is well taken, but I'll overrule it.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Ms. Martini, I'm going to ask you that question again. Could you tell the jury a little bit more about why you didn't trust Ms. Petrillo?
Yes, well, like I was saying, I was very worried about that alcohol after that alcohol poisoning because I would never want that for my baby. And also, Genesis would say things like the B&B looked ancient and compared the food to rehydrated space food.
And why did Genesis saying this to you bother you so much?
Because that was Casey's hard work. I wanted Casey to be with someone who valued her work and well-being. I just wanted her to be happy.
Did your relationship with Genesis ever improve?
Oh, of course. I love my Casey more than anything in the world, and for her sake, yes, it did improve.
And what do you mean by for Casey's sake?
Well, Casey made it very clear how much she loved Genesis, and I realized that Genesis would be in my life for the long haul, so I decided to bury the hatchet out of love for Casey.
And how exactly did you bury the hatchet?
Well, I reached out to her so that we could meet for lunch, and we did sometime, I believe it was January 2019. I explained that nothing mattered more to me than Casey's happiness, and I wanted a good relationship with Genesis, especially since we would be planning the wedding together, and the wedding needed to go well.
Why do you say that the wedding needed to go well?
This was a big deal for Casey, but also for my business. If anything went wrong at my own daughter's wedding, the bad publicity would destroy my business.
Did you do anything else to try and bury the hatchet with Genesis?
Yes, actually, in 2018, I created a specialty red wine blend that I planned to give Genesis at their rehearsal dinner. I was hoping my gift could act as an olive branch between the two of us.
And why did you choose wine to be that olive branch?
I knew our relationship had been rocky in the past, but I hoped that it would age into something rich and robust like the wine. I knew it worked because it meant a lot to Casey when I gave it to Genesis.
All right, Ms. Martini, I want to take a step back and talk about the wedding rehearsals. Could you explain to the jury how the rehearsal went?
Oh, everything went so well at first. The speeches were beautiful, and I was happy to hear Genesis incorporating family into her speech. When Genesis got the wine, Casey made a little heart with her hands and said thank you. It made me so happy that she appreciated my gesture. It seemed like everything was going well.
And what happened after the rehearsal dinner?
Well, we had a long day coming up, so I turned in early around 10:30 p.m. and I didn't speak to anyone until around 2:30 a.m.
Why didn't you speak to anybody until 2:30?
Well, at 2:30, Austin Lewis, my employee, called saying that someone had gone to the hospital, and I assumed it was Genesis because I had seen her drinking a lot the night before and thought she might have alcohol poisoning.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
What's the statement and who's the declarant?
She said Austin Lewis called and told her that someone was in the hospital.
All right, what's the response, Mr. Teacher?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, my video feed cut out right at the beginning of that objection, so I only heard the last two words. Could it be repeated?
Terry's got a hearsay objection to the statement of Austin Lewis saying somebody was in the hospital.
Your Honor, this statement's not being used for the truth of the matter asserted, but rather for the effect on the listener. The next question that I was going to ask was going to be, what did you do after receiving this call? Furthermore, Your Honor, I would also like to state that the issue of whether or not Genesis Petria went to the hospital is not at issue today, but this statement is simply being used for the effect on the listener. As, if I may proffer, the next question is, what did you do after receiving this call?
Any response, Mr. Kennedy?
Yes, we would just like to point out that we are, one of the plaintiff's claims is that the defendant did not know that Genesis Petria had been poisoned, and so we feel that they are using this, are offering this statement for the truth of the matter to prove that Harper Martini did in fact know about this poisoning before she was informed of it by Angel Rodriguez later.
And so how does this statement that somebody's gone to the hospital indicate in any way that she knew about the poisoning? I'm confused about that.
Just that someone had been poisoned, Your Honor.
Response, Your Honor.
Does the statement have say anything about poisoning, or is it just somebody's gone to the hospital?
The statement that she said was that she was told that somebody went to the hospital. Mrs. Martini was never told that somebody may have had alcohol poisoning. The statement that opposing counsel objected to only has to do with the hospital.
All right, I'll overrule the hearsay objection, but instruct the jury that that particular statement is not to be taken for the truth of the matter asserted.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Ms. Martini, what did you do after receiving this call?
I rushed to Genesis's room where I found the bottle I gave her empty on the floor. I was so angry that she had gotten drunk the night before the wedding, and I threw the bottle away. I knew there were a few journalists sneaking around my winery, and I didn't want them to leak the fact we were working on a new blend of wine, so I ripped off the label. I shouldn't have, but at the time I had absolutely no idea it would be a piece of evidence. It just looked like trash to me.
And Ms. Martini, are you aware that that same bottle later tested for pesticide?
Yes.
Do you know how pesticides might have gotten into that bottle?
No. That wine?
What's your objection? Sorry, Mr. Kennedy.
Speculation.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. It is only speculation once the witness has actually speculated. If the witness doesn't know the answer to that question, which if I may proffer, the witness is about to say no, that they don't know how the pesticide got into that bottle. There was no speculation testimony being exhibited out of this question.
All right, I'll overrule the objection. With that understanding, Mr. Kennedy, if there is speculation that comes out, I expect you to object to it at that time. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor.
Do you know how pesticides might have gotten into that bottle?
And no, that wine had been aging and hadn't been touched until it was bottled. It must have tested positive for pesticides when they leaked into the bottle after I threw it in the dumpster.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Response?
That's fine, Your Honor. We can strike the testimony having to do with it leaking in the dumpster.
All right, yes, I'll sustain the speculation objection. Jury is instructed to disregard any testimony about how pesticides may have come into contact with the wine bottle.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Ms. Martini, I know this might be a tough question, but we have to ask it. Did you poison that bottle?
Absolutely not. I would never do that to anyone, not even Genesis. I would never want to hurt Casey like that. Despite my relationship with Genesis, which I thought was improving and had worked very hard to improve, this wedding was just so important.
And Miss Martini, why was this wedding just so important?
It was my daughter's special day. All I wanted was for the wedding to go well, not just for Casey, but for my business. It would make no sense to deliberately hurt my own beloved business over a relationship that was getting better by the day.
Thank you, Ms. Martini. No further questions, Your Honor.
Examination, Mr. Kennedy.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Martini.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to start by talking about your relationship with the victim, Genesis. You and her didn't get along that well.
No, we didn't.
And she was your daughter's fiance, right?
Yes, she was my baby, Casey.
And it was actually back in 2018 when Casey and Genesis broke the news to you that they were engaged.
Yes, that's true, 2018.
And this is when you began getting involved on the wedding planning process.
Yes, that's correct. It was my baby's wedding. I was going to be there every step of the way.
And throughout this process, you disagreed with Genesis on many things about the wedding.
Yes, that is true. We did not agree on many things.
I'd like to talk to you about the night of the rehearsal dinner, which was on June 7th.
Yes.
Now, it's true that Genesis arrived 15 minutes late.
Yes, that is true.
And this upset you very much.
Yes, I was so frustrated. That day was supposed to be perfect, and I didn't understand why she was so late.
But you say you had a plan to make a peace with Genesis.
Yes, I wanted to extend an olive branch so badly.
And you had bottled her a fancy wine to extend this olive branch.
Yes, it was a specialty red wine blend called Cara.
And you bottled that Cara wine about a month or so before the wedding.
Yes, that's correct.
I'd actually like to talk to you about something that happened a month or so before the wedding as well. Do you recall Genesis leaving you a voicemail on May 12th around 1 a.m.?
Yes, I do.
Now, in this voicemail, this is actually when you learned about Genesis's plan to take Casey and move to France.
Yes.
And this is also when you learned that you would never get to meet your grandchildren.
Yes, that's what Genesis said to me at the time.
And this voicemail upset you greatly.
Oh, yes, of course. I wanted to be in my baby's life in whatever capacity she wanted me.
In fact, after hearing it, you said you wanted nothing more than to stop the wedding.
Yes, I felt that was what was best for Casey.
Now, back to the wine that you prepared a month or so before the wedding. When you prepared this wine, you fully knew that pesticides in wine were unable to be seen with the naked eye, correct?
Oh, yes, of course. That's why we take every precaution at Peony Estates.
And when you prepared this wine, you also fully knew that somebody drinking wine with pesticides in it would not look out of the ordinary at all.
Yes.
And when you prepared this wine, you also fully knew that someone drinking wine with pesticides in it would not be able to smell those pesticides.
Yes, I'm fully aware of that, yes.
And you had access to pesticides at the winery, right?
Of course, I'm the winery owner. We have to take care of our wine while remaining safe.
Now, back to the rehearsal dinner. You took this bottle of Cara wine and later presented Genesis with it.
Yes, of course. It was my olive branch to her. I thought we would finally get past all of this mush we had been dealing with for years.
So that's a yes to my question?
Yes, of course.
Now, this was the same bottle of wine that was later found to have had pesticides in it.
Yes, I believe so, but I have absolutely no idea how those got in there.
So that's a yes to my question?
Yes.
Now, one last thing I'd like to talk to you about. You tried to pay Genesis to leave Casey, correct?
Yes, I was so worried that Genesis was using Casey for her money and not for love, so I tested her with a note, and she did take the money.
So that's a yes to my question.
Yes, I tested her.
And you left her an envelope with a check for $300,000 in it.
Yes, that's correct. I needed to know the truth.
And you also left a note in this envelope.
Yes.
You'd recognize this note today, wouldn't you?
Of course.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to display what has been previously marked as Exhibit 24, constructively out of the view of the jury.
You may.
Ms. Martini, can you see the note on your screen?
Yes, I can.
You recognize this note, don't you?
Yes.
It's the note you left in that envelope?
Yes, it is.
And it hasn't been changed or altered in any manner?
No, not that I can tell.
And it is your handwriting?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we move Exhibit 24 into evidence. Yes.
Any objection to 24?
No objection, Your Honor.
24 is admitted.
Your Honor, at this time, may we constructively publish this exhibit in the view of the jury?
Yes.
Now, when Genesis saw this note, she put it back in the envelope and threw it at you.
Yes, she did.
And in this note, you tell her to leave Casey and the enclosed $300,000 is yours.
Yes,
right?
I wanted to test her and find out her true love for Casey.
And then you later go on to say that she had until the 7th. Choose wisely.
Yes.
And you were referring to June 7th, 2019 when you wrote this?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, Ms. Martini, isn't it true that early the next morning after June 7th, 2019, Genesis Petria unfortunately passed away?
Yes, it was so tragic. I was only referring to that in the note because that was the final deadline of when they would get married. That's all the time we had, but unfortunately, she did pass away.
So that is a yes to my question.
Yes.
And one last question, Ms. Martini. Isn't it true that you feel relieved, even happy that Genesis is no longer in your life?
I'm happy that Casey can finally return to our family at the winery.
Is that a yes to my question?
Yes, I'm happy that Casey's doing what she needs to for herself.
I have no further questions at this time. I pass this witness, Your Honor.
Anything further, Mr. Teacher?
No further questions, Your Honor. We ask that the witness be allowed to step down.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Martini. Any further witnesses from the defense?
No further witnesses, Your Honor. And with that, the defense rests its case in chief, and we ask for a 5 to 10 minute recess before closing.
Are there any rebuttal witnesses from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor.
Does the plaintiff close the evidence?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense close?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, I'll give you 8 minutes. It's 4:29 Central Time. Let's be back here at 4:36.
Plaintiff is ready to proceed, Your Honor.
All right, let's make sure we have everybody back. Defense counsel, are you ready?
Yes, defense is ready as well.
All right, do we have our two presider or scoring judges?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. All right, Mr. Holland, you may proceed.
May it please the court. It is completely tragic and sad that we all have to be here today. A wedding is supposed to be the beginning of a new journey for a couple, but this couple didn't get to make it that far. Their proposal was the beginning of the end. I'd like to talk more about who Genesis Petria was. Genesis Petria was a kind and sweet person who got along with and loved everyone she met. She had received a job offer in France, and Miss Petria was going to marry the love of her life, Casey Soto, and move to Paris. Sadly, Genesis's dreams can no longer be fulfilled because of her unfortunate death. Now, that was their beginning, but their end left a grieving fiance, a grieving family, and the abrupt end of a young life. Before going further, I'm going to explain how we proved the defendant poisoned Genesis Petria. We had to do this to a preponderance of evidence because the burden of proof falls on the plaintiff. In order to prove battery, we had to show three key elements. The first two elements are to prove an act by the defendant and intent to cause harmful or offensive contact. Refer back to the note you saw earlier that was confirmed to be written by the defendant. In this note, the defendant stated that Genesis had until the 7th to leave, or it was going to be the hard way. Not only that, but there are multiple witnesses who have seen the defendant express hate for Genesis firsthand. The defendant repeatedly threatened Genesis, even jokingly telling Angel Rodriguez that a canister of pesticides was meant for Genesis. Not only has the defendant openly talked about using pesticides on Genesis, the defendant has also expressed a desire to get rid of Genesis on multiple accounts. Up until the moment
Mr. Holland, I'm going to stop you for a second. You're breaking up on our end. Can you hear me?
The defendant has expressed care for the victim. The long act in Genesis has tested positive and was proven to contain pesticides. Organophosphate poisoning and respiratory failure that result in the
Mr. Holland, can you hear me?
Oh yeah, was I frozen?
You were breaking up a little bit. If we could stop the time for a second, make sure your connection is good. It looks like it's better now. Why don't you jump back in?
Excuse me, Your Honor.
So the bottle of wine the defendant gave has tested positive and was proved to resulted in the unfortunate death of Genesis Petria. Was I frozen again?
Yeah, you just kind of keep cutting out. What was somebody piped up, a timekeeper?
Sorry, that was me. I'm the plaintiff timekeeper. So I actually paused the time whenever you first stopped. I tried to stop him.
Okay.
So I'm not sure exactly what we should do about that situation.
Okay. Well, it's weird. Every time you start talking, it cuts out again. It's the first time it's happened today. Let me ask: Is that happening? Is that an issue for everybody, including our scoring judges, or is that just an issue on my end?
No, it's an issue for me as well.
Okay.
It's basically silent for some parts.
Okay. It looks like it's. Say a couple. Go sing a couple bars, Mr. Holland, and see if it's better now.
Let me see. We're not only here to tell you how the defendant intentionally poisoned.
Yeah, that's better. All right. Jump back in. Start the time.
Sorry about that. we are also here to tell you why the defendant poisoned Genesis. Getting Genesis out of Casey's life is what the defendant felt was the best outcome for Casey. Casey meant the world to the defendant. The defendant describes Casey as being perfect with only one flaw. And that flaw was Genesis Petria. No, that wasn't supposed to pop up. Sorry about that. And that flaw was Genesis Petria. The defendant resented Genesis since the day the two met. Why? Simply because Genesis didn't like the wine from Peony Estates. Since that day, the defendant constantly tried to push Casey away from Genesis, even going to the lengths of attempting to pay Genesis off to leave Casey alone. When not even money can solve your issues, you start asking yourself, well, what can? And the defendant certainly found their answer, the answer that was at the end of a bottle. What nobody knew was the lengths the defendant would go to protect their only child and keep Casey away from Genesis. What nobody knew was the pesticides purposely placed into that bottle of wine the defendant specifically only wanted Genesis to drink. What nobody knew was that Genesis would die the next morning from pesticide poisoning. Nobody except the defendant. The defendant always hated Genesis and never wanted to make peace with her, but the defendant did get peace from Genesis dying. The defendant finally got Genesis out of Casey's life, as the defendant has expressed, made her happy. The biggest dream the defendant desperately begged for has finally come true, at the expense of the Petria family, at the expense of Casey, and at the expense of everyone who loved and cared for Genesis Petria. We aren't here to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant poisoned Genesis Petria. We are here to show you that it is more likely than not that the defendant intended to cause harm to Genesis by purposely poisoning her. Think of it like a scale. If the scale is tipping even slightly in our favor, then that means we've met our requirement for proving battery. All that's left is for you to see that we met that requirement. Finding the defendant liable for Genesis's death, it's never going to fill the hole that has been left in the Petria family. Genesis was taken away from them, and now they only have the loving memories that they have of her. They aren't going to get to see Genesis get married. They aren't going to get to see her off at the airport when she leaves for Paris. And they aren't going to get a call from her when she talks about how great France is with Casey. But what they can get is proper justice for their daughter. So let's make sure that the Petrios can finally sleep at night knowing that that justice has been served. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. Is the defense ready to present its closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed.
May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. We know when, we know where, but we don't know how. Now, before I talk about the holes inside the plaintiff's story, I want to tell you a story of my own. A story of a mother and a daughter, Harper and Casey. You see, after the tragic death of Harper's husband and Casey's father, the two became close, not only when Casey was growing up, but also later in life. They decided to start up their own business, Peony Estates, a winery, bed and breakfast, and event space. It was Harper and Casey, mother and daughter, working hand in hand together, not only on their relationship, but also on their business. But just like all stories, things change. Casey found love in a woman named Genesis Petria. The two were to become wed. But now it was no longer Harper and Casey. It was Harper, Casey, and Genesis. And just like any normal human being, Harper was scared of change because she was losing her little girl. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today's case is one that we've heard time and time again in movies, TV shows, and even in our own lives. Sometimes mother-in-laws and daughter-in-laws don't get well together when they first meet. But eventually, Harper came around to it because she loved Casey. She stuck out an olive branch, asking for forgiveness and asking her to join her family. Harper, Casey, and Genesis. Now, in today's case, the plaintiff has brought the very serious charge of battery against the defendant, Harper Martini. This case of battery And with that, there's three elements that the plaintiff had to prove in today's court. They had to prove that first, Harper Martini committed some horrible act. Second, that this act intended. And that third, that this act harmed Genesis. And the plaintiff has to prove this by preponderance of the evidence, which means that they have to prove that these things are more likely than not true. To clarify, the defense in today's case has no burden of proof. In other words, the plaintiff has to prove to you that Harper intentionally poisoned the bottle of wine in the hopes of killing Genesis Petria. And for every fact, every testimony, every piece of evidence, the scales of justice tip further and further to one side. But members of the jury, you heard today's case. You heard that the plaintiff left out facts and evidence that left a gaping hole in their story. They gave us the when. They told us the where, but we don't know the how. The most important piece in the plaintiff's puzzle is missing in today's case, and that is, how did Genesis Petria die? How could Harper do it? And what caused her death truly? Now, first, let's look at how Genesis could have done it, or Harper could have done it. You learned from Blair Osborne that Harper and Casey Soto were very close. She was the apple of her eye. And even though the relationship with Genesis was more strained, Harper would do anything to keep Casey happy. There was simply no intent to harm Genesis. But more importantly, Ms. Osborne told us that Genesis has been drinking a significant amount of wine on the rehearsal night with Angel Rodriguez and Drew. Now, you also heard from the defendant side today's case, Harper Martini. Now, she told you that she needed this wedding to go well, because if it didn't, Harper would lose everything that she worked so hard for with Casey Soto. The plaintiff tries to tell you that Harper Martini would risk the entirety of her business and her relationship with Casey Soto simply out of spite. All the plaintiff has told you today is about squabbles. Disagreements over tardiness, disagreements over the importance of wine or the taste of wine or how the venue looks or how Peony Estates looks, but none of these things equate to trying to poison somebody. Why would Harper Martini risk her relationship with her beloved daughter, risk her business, and risk her livelihood on a simple squabble between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law? The plaintiff can't answer this question for you. And that means that the scales tip further in our favor. The plaintiff also cannot tell you, how did Genesis die? Now, I'm going to tell you what we do know inside today's case. We do know that Genesis Petria was exhibiting vomiting on that day, nausea. She exhibited inability to stand or walk, and she also exhibited respiratory paralysis. Check, 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 check. All symptoms of alcohol poisoning. You heard testimony from Blair Osborne that he saw Genesis Petria drinking heavily that night. And even their own expert witness can't tell you 100% for a fact that Genesis Petria didn't die from alcohol poisoning that night. You heard from our own expert witness that asserted the fact that many of the symptoms that Genesis was exhibiting that night were symptoms of alcohol poisoning. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, think. Do you think with your heartstrings like the plaintiff is asking you? Do not let them turn your heartstrings into strings. Think with your mind when you go into that deliberation room and think. Members of the jury, knowing when and where, not enough to find Harper Martini liable for battery. We must know how, and the fact of the matter is the plaintiff expects you to fill in that gap. Now, the plaintiff tells you that this is the beginning of the end. But ladies and gentlemen of the jury, they have a story.
Mr. Teachner, I think we lost you. Can you hear us? Can anybody hear me? Is it me?
No, it's him.
Okay, great. Would somebody on the defense team please contact Mr. Teacher and tell him that he is frozen on our screens, and please make sure the time is stopped as well.
We will, Your Honor.
Oh, there, Your Honor. I believe that I dropped, so I went onto my phone.
Okay, great.
How much time do I have left? And also, at what point did I cut out?
It looks like you have 42 seconds.
Yep, that's what I have.
What was the last statement that I made before I was frozen, if I may ask, Your Honor?
Just keep going, Nick.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, opposing counsel wants to tell you that this was the beginning of the end for Genesis Petrillo. But opposing counsel's story doesn't have a beginning or an end because they don't have a story to stand on. I ask you to ask a question of how. Find my client, Harper Martini, not liable in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Teacher. Is there anything further from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor, a rebuttal. But before that, I would like to ask the defense what time they had, because on our end, we had 2 minutes with the technical issues.
Okay, can we have
That works. I had 1:30, but I think I prematurely kept it going. So go ahead and go with 2 minutes.
All right.
Okay.
2 minutes.
It is well known that Genesis drank a lot that night. I mean, who doesn't celebrate marriage by drinking at the rehearsal? The defense's witness, Blair Osborne, has already stated that Genesis didn't look intoxicated and that he was very confident that she hadn't drank too much. Ladies and gentlemen, we aren't here for maybes and we aren't here for coincidences. Is it a coincidence that Genesis rejected the defendant's offer to be paid off on the same day she got poisoned? Is it a coincidence that the defendant jokingly states that the pesticides were meant for Genesis? Is it a coincidence that Genesis dies from pesticide poisoning the very next morning after her life has been threatened? These aren't coincidences, and they certainly aren't maybes. They are deliberate actions the defendant took to rid themselves of Genesis. If the defendant truly cared about the wedding and wanted to create a better relationship with Ms. Petria, then why try to pay Genesis to leave, which would ultimately result in the canceling of the wedding and would leave Casey with a broken heart? If the defendant needed the wedding for good publicity, then why did hearing Casey's feelings of canceling the wedding leave the defendant feeling ecstatic? As Blair Osborne, the wedding planner, has stated here today, this wedding was doomed from the start. As soon as the defendant met Genesis, as soon as the defendant got involved with the wedding planning, and as soon as the defendant gave Genesis a poisoned bottle of wine, this proposal and this wedding was the beginning of the end. But finding the defendant liable of battery will be the beginning of the Petrios getting the justice that they deserve. Thank you.
All right, thank you, counsel. Is there anything else from either side that needs to be brought to the court's attention before I excuse the jury and submit the case?
No, Your Honor, the defense has nothing more.
No, Your Honor, the plaintiff doesn't either.
All right, then I will constructively send the jury to begin their deliberations and submit the case to them. At this time, if I could have the scoring judges go ahead and submit their ballots and let me know when that is completed. I will inform the tournament that our round is done. Please, everybody stay on the Zoom meeting until we have confirmation that we can leave, and then we can give you some brief comments if you'd like. Okay, it looks like our judges have submitted their ballots. If everybody can pop back up on their cameras, I'd like the scoring judges to introduce themselves. I'll start. My name is Colin Powell, and I'm a trial lawyer in Dallas, Texas. I do civil litigation on the defense side, product liability cases, and insurance defense cases in the personal injury realm primarily. This was a great round. It was fun to watch. Mock trial has changed in this respect because normally I'd love to all be in a courtroom or in a courtroom with all of y'all, and that's just not how we can do it this year. But I commend you for adapting to the circumstances. The one overarching mark of a good trial lawyer, I think, is being able to adapt on the fly. And a special kudos to our closing attorneys who each had technical difficulties during their closings. And the only way to approach that is to just go on. And y'all both did very well with that. So congratulations on that. That's actually the first technical difficulty I've had. I've judged the other 2 rounds, and it's amazing that it's gone this smoothly, I think. So congratulations on that. If I could have the scoring judges to introduce themselves briefly and give their comments, and then I'll wrap it up.
Hi, my name's Madeline Falone. I do have comments. I have comments for each of y'all. I don't think I got a ton of time with this, so I'm just going to try to go somewhat quickly, just kind of down the row. Plaintiff, Mr. Kennedy, I think you were very well spoken. You had a great narrative, great explanation of the burden of proof, the preponderance of evidence. You were the first person to speak, and you were also the first person to mention that the preponderance of the evidence is like a scale. I think 2 or 3 other people mentioned that as well, which might have gotten a bit redundant, but it is a good example. So that was great. A critique that I had for you, that I had for many other people, was that during a direct examination or cross-examination, a great advocacy tip and point would be to guide the witness to the arguments that you're going to be making later. And you certainly did that, and everyone did to an extent, but I think that could always be improved. So maybe that's something to consider moving forward. Ms. Ireland, in your direct examination, you had a very natural yet compelling delivery, which is important. But again, you could lead your questions into arguments better. Mr. Holland, I'm glad we heard a lot from you in this round. You had a very nice examination, direct. You have a good even tone, but enough variance in your voice to keep what you're saying interesting, which can sometimes be a problem the longer that people talk. But you had very good leading questions as well. And a point that I'll make for you that is true also for others, try to keep an upward inflection to your voice when you ask a question so that it sounds like a question and less like a statement. I recognize that sometimes during an examination, you'll say something that you know to be true and you know that they know it's true, but it still might be helpful to ask it as a question, and it seems a bit more damning when it is true that way. Plaintiff witnesses altogether, again, great tone of voice, nice job answering questions. I could tell that you all knew what you were talking about. I will say for Ms. Garcia on the plaintiff side, and then particularly the last defense witness, but kind of for everybody, it's kind of an idiosyncratic thing to use an accent or to play a big character as a witness. Personally, I don't really like it. I find it distracting, especially when you know what you're saying and you know your case really well, you know the story, but putting on a big affect can tend to be distracting. So I don't know, perhaps think about maybe that a bit more. On the defense, again, great for everybody. I was really happy with all of the examinations there. Mr. Teachner, you had great objections. Again, nice even tone, very good leading with questions. Also, something that I liked about your examination, Mr. Teachner, you had a nice treatment of the witness, which is good. It builds credibility, even though you're making a very strong case. So great job there. Ms. Amen and Ms. Balut, again, great examinations. And as far as defense witnesses, I can see that you all know your case very well, but a point for everybody. Remember that this is a story that you're telling, and it's quite a compelling story, and keep the tone correct for what the story is, right? This is about somebody who was poisoned the day before their wedding and who died as a result of it, perhaps. So the tone ought to match that. So Ms. Aguirre, for the plaintiff side, I think your tone was really good as a witness. However, the final witness for the defense, Ms. Martini, I recognize the character that you were playing, but it might be better to keep in mind what exactly it is that you're being accused of, and kind of play a little bit more into that. But overall, great job.
Great, thanks. Mr. Patterson?
My name's Andrew Patterson. I'm a 2L here at Baylor Law. I did mock trial all in undergrad. Now I judge quite a bit and coach the undergrad team at Baylor. I thought this was a great round as well. Y'all are, especially for halfway through being halfway through the season already and doing this online, like y'all are in a pretty good position. I would say for making for the competitive season in the spring. I write a lot of comments in my in the comment form, so I won't get into specifics for y'all. Just two kind of like big picture things. One with direct examinations. The goal is to be conversational. I know like obviously we all write scripts for our directs because it's just something you do in mock trial, but you don't want to come off as being scripted. You want to make sure it was conversational still. So like as the witness, keep in mind, how would a normal person answer this question? Because there's like times where a question gets asked and then you conveniently put in this kind of like random fact that like would a normal person just include that in their answer? Like obviously you're trying to like set up your attorney's questions, but I felt like sometimes that they were just like forced facts that were like thrown in there that like if I just asked a normal person that in conversation, I don't think they would be like, oh, and like let me also talk about this. So just like make sure you're being real responsive to what the question is. I think attorneys on your end, the way you can help that is by making sure that you are you're fine tuning your questions to get out those answers. So I think, yeah, so that's a big thing. And then also just kind of like the way to take like the next level for, making like an orcs run or, potentially like a nationals run, the tippy top teams, it's all about being responsive in the round. And so there were a couple of times where I thought, especially for attorneys on cross-examination, you had the witness like in a spot where you could just, where you had just gotten out something like pretty damning on them. And you could have like really like hit it home. Like there's a couple of times where they just like, kind of like tossed you up a softball where you asked just, respond to like what they said, take their words and just kind of throw them back in. I think it happened at least once on with like Miss Martini where she where like if you want to make her out to be, like this like evil mother-in-law person, like she gave you like a statement about like Genesis, like all the time, like that's all the time I had. Like you could have just like thrown that back in your face. Yeah, it's all the time you had because you poisoned her, right? Or like it's all the time we had because a bottle of wine that she drank that you gave her killed her. So just kind of like you throw in like a statement like that or a question like that, even if you get objected to argumentative, it's still gonna like land. I think that's again my opinion. I don't practice yet, but from a mock trial standpoint, so I think like. If y'all can incorporate just a little bit more responsiveness in your cross examinations and then even like direct examinations, I think that'll kind of put y'all over the top.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. All right, I'm going to wrap it up with just a couple of overarching things that I noticed today. You know, I've done mock trials since high school and then college and law school level, so I've seen a lot. And you know, I didn't notice today that either side really had a theme that they, you know, used effectively. I think there was, you know, a little bit on the defense side, but what, you know, and I'm not even talking about a mock trial theme. I think when I participate and coach people, I encourage, you know, them to be as much like real lawyers as possible, because that's, you know, honestly what's more persuasive even in this context. And a theme is a persuasive tool. It's a way to connect the jury to the arguments that you're making. And so it doesn't have to be a cute little phrase that you say, you know, at the beginning of your opening, at the end of your closing. It's something that like runs throughout the trial that just makes the jury think about the arguments you're making. And so I'd encourage y'all to really think about what universal truths that support the particular sides that that you're arguing, because that's how you're going to get a jury behind you. Jurors are lay people, first of all, and then people who have no connection to the issues in this suit, and they're expected to care about it somehow. And the way that you make them care about it is to give them a stake in the game. And the way you give them a stake in the game is to create some kind of overarching theme that's based on a universal truth that they can get behind. Somehow it affects, like, the outcome of this suit affects them on a, you know, universal level. And if you can tap into that, you can tap into some pretty significant persuasive power. So look for that as you continue to develop your cases. I think all the other comments that I had were specifically about cross-examination, because cross-examination is one of the most fun things to do. And so it's something that naturally I look for, I think. One thing I noticed, there were a lot of really good cross questions on both sides. Short, compact, distinct facts or issues that are being communicated. But one thing I noticed pretty consistently is that that's all they were. They were questions, and then another question, and then another question, and there was no variance in them. And when you get into a rhythm like that, it gets boring. And that is especially so in the Zoom world, where, you know, you've got a juror who is looking at a box on a screen and there's no telling what going on, you know, in the room around them. And so as much as you can captivate their attention using your voice, you got to take advantage of that. And so instead of this string of questions that all sound the same, find the natural places that you want to emphasize, your big questions that are going to hit at the very end, and build up to it with your voice and your pace and your tone until you get to the point where you nail them with that last question, and then you sit down. And so let's see, there was one place, I think it was Mr. Holland, that was crossing the wedding planner. There was a fact that kind of snuck in that I hadn't heard before in this trial, and it was the fact that the defendant said something to Genesis, "You take this bottle and open it when you're alone because it's just for you," or something like that. And that's a significant fact, I think, because it goes to intent. It's like, you know, if you're at a wedding and you open up a bottle of wine, no telling who's going to take a swig out of it or pour some out. But this is the defendant communicating that I want you to have this. And so that gets you thinking, well, there's a reason that I want you to have this. And in your cross-examination, that was just another question. It was just, so you said, open it when you were alone. Or you heard the defendant say, open it when you're alone, as opposed to building up to that point and then saying, you know, Mr. Wedding Planner, and in fact, you even heard the defendant say, open this bottle when you're alone, didn't you? And then just let it land, and then pause, and then move on. Use your tone of voice, your pacing, the words to create a dramatic effect, and that will captivate people and communicate the message that you're trying to get across. This is the cross-examination of the grieving fiance is tough because it's a grieving fiance, and you're going to have to deal with that, you know, in real life too. It's tempting to start out with, "I'm really sorry for your loss. You know, this must be really hard for you. And I don't know that that's what I would encourage you to do. I think your tone in that was very good. I don't think that it's necessarily going to be seen as genuine because of the position you're in. I had a professor in law school that heard somebody do that during an exercise and immediately stopped him and said, "Did you send flowers to that funeral? Did you call the family, after the death happened to console them?" And of course, the answer is no, I'm a lawyer. I came in afterwards. And so if you didn't do that, don't try to sound like you were somebody that really cared about, this person, because it's just not genuine, and juries pick up on that. And so I think using a softer tone to start out with is appropriate, but trying to bend over backwards is, to make you seem, emotionally connected to them is just going to make the jury say, well, that guy's just trying to get one over on us. And never, ever, ever ask the witness, "Can I ask you a question?" You don't need to ask permission of the witness to ask any questions, especially, it doesn't get you any points at all. And then the last thing I'll say about cross is people on both sides did this. Never, ever, 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 ever say, "I have one more question," because you never have one more question. And the both times that you said that, you didn't have one more question. You had 2 or 3. Even if that question was that, so that's a yes to my question, that's still another question. You are setting yourself up for failure when you do that. And it may, and you don't, and what's important about that is you don't want to end a cross-examination on that. You don't want to end making a promise to the jury that finally you're done with your cross-examination, and then it lasts a couple more questions, right? That just doesn't make a jury like you. And then it's also lying because you have more. So if you're going to say that, ask one more question and sit down. I've had judges in rounds say, "That was your one more question, you're done." A better way to do it, is probably just asking the question. Now, there's one final thing I want to talk about is okay too. One topic I'd like to discuss with you, and you get around it that way. But never I have one more question. And even if you do, if your last question is so good that it's going to be your last question, it really shouldn't matter what the witness says. So if your last question is, the one smoking gun thing that the jury is just going to eat up, it shouldn't matter to you that the witness spouts off such that you need to come back and say, "That's a yes to my question, isn't it?" Because that's just a wasted end of your cross-examination. Let your cross-examination end on the strength of your question. And then what I would tell you in the courtroom is, no matter what that witness says, put your pad down and walk back to your seat while they're still talking, because it doesn't matter. You landed your point. And let's see, I think that's the last thing I was going to say about that. I will echo what Madeline said about, witnesses. This is nothing, Miss, what's your Averill? Is that how you say your name?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. You are a great witness, and you have acting background clearly or something like that. So I don't want you to take offense to this at all, but I wrote down martini is too much. And I wrote that down because if you were my client and I was defending you in a lawsuit, we would have had a discussion about how you were going to approach things. And I would have known by this time that you have that kind of personality, which is great. But because you are being sued for the death of someone, and I think you can get into your personality as the examination goes, but the very first response can't be, "Oh, hi, love, how are you doing?" or whatever it was, because it doesn't seem to be treating the circumstances with the formality and reverence that really is, should be surrounding it, because this is a case about someone dying. And so, I think that's a conversation you have to have with all of your witnesses. Remember that, yes, you're playing a character, but you're playing a character in a very particular role, a character who is coming to court to testify, and nobody is excited about coming to court to testify. They're not usually there to be a character. So you can have personality in your witnesses, and that's encouraged. And I think it makes for a more exciting round. You just can't let that, kind of overtake what this scenario is all about. So I'm going to shut up. That's all I had to say. This was a great round. I wish you all the best of luck as the competition and the year proceeds. If y'all have any questions for us, you can ask them now, or we can go ahead and end. Hearing nothing, I'm going to end the meeting. Y'all have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.